This is the Henry's Child Podcast. Am I crazy? Or am I just raving?
Today's Am I Crazy or Am I Just Raving podcast is with our friend Richard Miller. Richard Miller's introduction to Henry's Child came essentially around the time that I had joined the band back in 1995. And I had known Richard through a series of other friends like Eben Pagan and Jarrett Hawley, folks that we're all familiar with, and many of whom have been on the Am I Crazy or Am I Just Raving podcast. And I got up past my 50th episode and I realized that he hadn't been on. And I immediately was like, we have got to get this handled. So what you're about ready to listen to is a great conversation with a guy who really gets music on a deep and fundamental level, and who not only gets it, but he's just an incredible musician himself. In fact, we actually had started that band Hack with Rex Morningstar, who went on to sing for Henry's Child with a record called Learning Too Much. I also had forgot that Richard had joined the American Girls up in Portland. And the American Girls were the last band that Elemental Records signed from the Sonic explosion. And as John Bolt talks about in his episodes, he reminded me that the American Girls were the first band that went from Elemental and were essentially sold to Sony Records. So there's a little bit of an affinity there. And as you're about ready to hear, all happened from a backyard party. But before we get going and into that, let me do some housekeeping that I like to do every couple weeks here. First off, I'm happy to report that the Listen Closely record, which is the redoing of some of the songs from Mumbles and Screams, is now in the duplication process, or the replication process. It is now being created onto CD, and we will have CDs first, and it's almost ready to go. It sounds great. I'm very excited to share it with you. When the website changes and becomes all about Listen Closely is when we will have the records for sale. So you can either come to Salem and pick one up, or you can buy one online through Bandcamp. And stay tuned to the very end where I play a song from Hack called Eastern Thinking. And we actually talk about it during the podcast. So without any further ado, here is a conversation between myself and my friend, Richard Miller. So it's really weird, Richard. I mean, who would have thought that the Juke Room, which was our old studio, the Juke Room, I mean, down in Eugene, dude, that's considered like high-end real estate now.
Yeah, man, they build a lot of stuff up down there. I knew that empty lot in front of it would be used for something. Like, they got rid of that. I mean, it's been a year since I've been down there, but didn't they demolish that whole area right there? And they built some apartments, or what all did they do?
Well, they put apartments, and they put that federal courthouse there, too. That's down there on the corner. That's a big deal for Eugene to get a federal courthouse.
So let me tell you a quick story about the Juke Room. It's an interesting
please
story.
do.
I don't know if you know this story. So the Juke Room is where all this stuff obviously originated, our relationship, Hack. We've jammed in there with a couple different projects. That was a garage that was owned by this guy, I forget John something, I forget his name, but he lived in Hawaii. And so I rented that garage. I think I paid $100 and something a month, which back then it was a lot of money for me because I, wasn't making much. But I would park in front. It was two garages. There was a bigger garage and then a smaller garage. And I would park in front of the smaller garage because this guy was in Hawaii. And one day, evidently, he came back unbeknownst, and he had a car in there, and he wanted to get it out. So he put a tire in front of his car and the back of my S10 pickup truck, and he pushed it all the way across the gravel, all the way to the other side. And so you can imagine how shocked I was when I came, and I was like,
"Your car's
where's my car?" And I looked across, and I'm like, and then he shortly returned. He said, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" "Yeah, I had to get my car out and, just pushed yours." Anyways, those were weird times, man.
What's weird is, man, if people were to do that today, I'd be afraid they'd pull a gun on me or something, man. Not a trip. Yeah. That's a trip. So the Juke Room was just this place down in Eugene, kind of, I think it was on 6th, really close to Agripac at the time, where they had that whole, because every season would be a different smell, right?
That's right.
Remember, like, the corn season?
Right. Yeah.
Season of the
And
Corn.
the beats were the worst.
Oh my
beats
God,
or
beats were
something was
horrible.
the worst, dude.
Those were bad.
the worst.
And so it was
Yeah.
this little rehearsal studio. And were you the one to actually rent it?
No, what ended up happening was that I took that over after my friend Rick Bloom was in there with his band. It was like a cover. He had a couple different cover bands, and they were gonna. I think Rick was going to move to Portland, is I think actually what was happening, and the band was kind of disbanding, if you will. And I had an opportunity to take it over, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take this over. This is great. And so I ended up taking it over, and it was really well built out. I mean, these guys that were involved with it were contractors, and so they built a loft there and built a little stage. And I forget if I put the carpet in or if they put the carpet in, but it was a really cool environment. Really, it didn't have a bathroom, but we made it a cool environment between what they did and what I did. There was a little microwave there, a little sofa bed. It was a really cool environment. And that was, I think, the key to a lot of what we did early on was the vibe in that place, because I really tried to foster a really kind of a bubble, like a creative bubble. When you went in there, it didn't have a lot of the, and again, for some people, the kind of sketchy, scummy elements will bring a certain creative process out and a creative vibe. But I wanted that to it was like, when you were in there, it just kind of had a real cool vibe to it. You know, it was dimly lit, it was comfortable, and the carpet actually kind of got rid of some of the ambient acoustic stuff, which also made it good for recording, which we did some different recordings in there. But that was the place, man. That was where a lot of this early stuff that we did kind of started. And also, like, if you were trying to get somebody to play with you, like, bringing them to your juke room, your jam room, it was like, oh wow, like this is different. I wasn't expecting this, right? You got a drum set up, you got recording stuff. It instantly puts you in a position. I'm 22 years old, 21, 22 years old. Like, you're a baller. They walk in, they're like, oh wow, like, and you know what I mean? It was a positioning thing too.
Sort of instantly gave you credibility with
Exactly.
people who we wanted to have credibility with.
Exactly. Because back then, it was like Eugene was right in the fringe of all this kind of that grunge era music. We were just close enough to be part of it, but not close enough to be in the heart of it. And so we all kind of felt like we were in this little bubble. I keep using that word bubble a lot, but we were kind of somehow connected to it, even though it was out of Seattle, mostly in Portland. But anyways, yeah, that was an important part of that, of kind of that connection with those musicians early on.
Yeah. And so with the juke room kind of going in the background, I was playing in Rain's Edge, and I had brought you into Rain's Edge when Micah was going to take off. And it was actually had Jake Morton in the band for that very, very short period of time, and Jarrett Hawley, too. So it was kind of this incestuous, I just kind of brought all my friends in, made this band. And at the same time, I was going to college. And in college, I had a photography class that I took every Tuesday and Thursday nights, like you do when you go to night school and that sort of thing. And there was this freaky dude in there who I just was magnetically drawn to. Part of it was his singing was so almost like Robert Smith from The Cure, and he was just kind of into our music and into our vibe, and that's where we birthed a band called Hack, which was me and you and Rex Morningstar and maybe Revo Godwin for a few minutes, right? And then Corey Empens, who I knew from high school. Corey actually recorded some of the gear that he had down at the juke room. He used to record the demo that got Henry's Child into the Sonic Explosion in 97.
Well, let's back up. When I ended up leaving Eugene and moving to Portland, Corey took it over. Corey took the juke room over.
Oh, he did. That's right.
Yes,
I remember that.
But before then, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, well, maybe I forget if he came down, because I had some, cassette-based. I had like an 8-track or a 16-track. I think it was 8-track cassette recorder. You record on regular cassettes. It was, I forget because we recorded stuff with Corey. I think we did some things at the studio or the juke room and some things at his place. But he ended up taking it over.
That might have been a little afterwards, because didn't you record Hold My Ass and Say Goodbye?
Speak to Me.
Was that? Oh, that was Speak to Me, a.k.a. Hold My Ass and Say Goodbye. With Andy, didn't Andy Smith sing vocals on that?
He did. He absolutely did. Yeah. Musically at that time, I was all over the map. Like I kind of had transitioned from kind of being into hard rock, heavy metal, I kind of had then Dream Theater showed up, and I'm like, oh my God, this is the best ever. And then I kind of was starting to fall out of love with that, and kind of started getting into more, I don't know, man, organic. Like I started getting into players more like Steve Ray Vaughan, Eric Johnson, people like that. And then our friend Steve Ariola came from LA, and exposed me to this whole other kind of guitar playing that I just wasn't really exposed to. That song, it was very inspired by Pink Floyd, actually. I was using this interesting delay.
Oh,
thing,
yeah.
And it kind of had a little bit of another brick in the wall kind of vibe about it, because I was using this delay that I bought this in Teleflex. I was like, oh my God, the Teleflex is the best ever.
I totally remember that.
It had a certain kind of a quality. It had a certain kind of quality about it that was better than like the Digitech DSP 256 and all that stuff. It just sounded more premium, like the Lexicon stuff that was like $3,000 that nobody could afford, unless you were a baller. So I was really kind of enamored with some of the delays in there, and so I just kind of built this riff, and it was very Pink Floyd. It was very another brick in the wall inspired. If you listen to it now, you'll hear what that is. But of course, because I was into progressive rock, I made the drum parts a lot more aggressive. I played drums, I played bass. So guitar stuff, the chords, the melody, and everything was very Pink Floyd inspired. The bass, I played enough bass that I understood groove, so I really tried to make it groove. It was funky. It had a certain funkiness to it. And then the drums were like, straight Neil Peart, more like, and I had this, I wasn't sure who I wanted to sing on it, and I forget who it was that let Andy hear it. Maybe it was me, I forget, or somebody suggested that Andy record some vocals, and then he came down and he laid down the vocals, and it was a really great track. It was a really great track.
Well, we also jumped ahead a little bit. I mean, for a while we had, before you recorded that song, we had that band Hack, which was Rex and me and you essentially.
Yeah, Rex was playing guitar. Rex was not a very technical guitar player, and so I really think that at that time you and I had to pull the weight. Rex had an amazing voice. He wasn't a real sophisticated guitar player, and so we had more work to do, which was great for me because I always wanted to overplay back then. And, anytime there was an opportunity to do a fill or do something to fill a space, I was all about that. And so we both were kind of brought to task, and that was cool. Steve joined that later on.
Right, as a lead guitar player, right.
Right.
And we would play John Henry's and Good Times, and those are the only two places I can remember playing. But that's all you needed in Eugene in 1995. I mean,
it wasn't a lot of places other than the Wow Hall back then.
Well, yeah. Oh, getting in the Wow Hall was way too difficult back then for that.
Right.
I was going to say, I think I actually have all 4 of those songs. There's
that's great.
Like Eastern Thinking, Weasel. Of those, what do you remember?
I remember all of them. Eastern Thinking, Weasel. Yeah, and I overplayed in all of them, and I loved it, and it was so fun. And I remember the drums drowning in reverb. And anytime I could use that signature Neil Peart, I was using it.
Dude.
And it was so fun. Well, also back then, and I don't know when I started playing to a metronome, but back then none of that stuff was played to a metronome. And so if you listen to it now, it's
there's
like
no
it
click
goes
track.
back and forth. Metronome, what? What are you click track? What? That's for sissies. Who plays to a fucking click track?
Oh my God,
all professional musicians,
so
actually.
That's so true. Oh God, that's so funny. So if I find Eastern Thinking, I'm going to put it in the podcast.
You should.
I should. Maybe I'll wait till the end and put it in there.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know if you're ready to pivot, but then after Hack kind of, you could tell the whole story, but then after Hack, after you left Hack, Rex and I continued to play together, and I moved from the drums to playing guitar and multi-instrumental stuff, which we'll get to that. But
that's
because there's two versions of Eastern Thinking. There's the one that we had with Hack, and then there's one where the reformed Hack was called Jacob's Angel. I don't know what that even meant, but there's another version of Eastern Thinking where I'm pretending like I'm Al Di Meola with the classical guitar. Straight up Al Di Meola, 1972. Faster. It was just,
Yeah, but you could hold your own.
playing.
There was no leprosy.
I could.
I mean,
Yeah, right. Unclean playing. Yeah, the unclean leper. Exactly.
I distinctly remember that I think it was either Corey or Jarrett, or maybe Corey and Jarrett, that recorded a full live show at Cafe Paradiso for Jacob's Angel. I mean, like I literally have the original. Maybe it's not the original. I literally have the tapes down at the rehearsal studio in Salem. I mean, it's clearly labeled Jacob's Angel.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I did not know.
I don't know what that
would probably be a Jarrett thing.
It was the 8 tracks at the time. They played at a different speed, and so. But you know, I'll pull it out and see if I can actually play it. If I pull it out and it goes, you know, then we know we're screwed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, you could probably also buy that gear. You know, it's interesting, that gear, not to go on a tangent, but that gear that you couldn't give away, you know, those old 8 tracks and 16 tracks, cassette-based things, they're now on eBay selling for about 80% of what they sold for new, which is insane. So you can get those pieces of equipment, but they're just ridiculous because now it's boutique, it's vintage, it's still crap, you know. But people are like, oh my God, I shouldn't have sold that. I got to get that one of those things back to hear my old songs again. That's why they're selling.
Exactly. Right. Totally. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. So did you play it all on the Rex Morningstar record, or had you moved to Portland by the time he had done that?
No, no, on his. So there were 2 different. No, the one that you're talking about, the Black album.
Yes.
The Rex Morningstar Black album. Yeah. No, I didn't play on that. I was already in Portland.
Okay.
But we did a Jacob's Angel recording at Corey Empin's place.
Oh, really? Okay.
We did. We recorded a bunch of stuff at Corey's place. And if you listen to that album, it's really interesting because I can hear a lot of weird artifacts in there. You know, I can hear my dobro playing. I hear where my thumb pick would hit the top of the acoustic resonator on the dobro. I had a 1930 dobro. I was broke as shit, living in a tiny apartment, but I had a $1,500 guitar that was built in 1930, and that was a great guitar. But I could hear myself hitting, and I wasn't aware of the what would you call it, poor technique of that, but I can hear it in the recording. I don't know that it actually draws too much attention to it, but I can hear it. And I can also hear myself in the condenser microphone that Corey put in front of my classical guitar. I had my head down, I was playing, and I could hear myself breathing. And if you listen to that recording, you can hear, you know, and it's the best thing about it is one of the inhales is right kind of where I'm not playing much and Rex isn't singing, you know, another day. I mean, it's really so. But that was a fun recording session. We were in there.
Yeah, that was Eugene art, dude. That was, I mean, now that you've confessed that it was an accident, people don't think you're as much of a genius.
Exactly. The other thing I remember that is Corey had these, I don't know where he got them. I don't know if he got them at whatever the sunflower market, whatever that market was, but he got these candies. He had a candy dish on top of one of his monitors. Do you remember this? He had these little coffee candies. And so I was all jacked up on caffeine because at that time, you know, some of the best coffee in the world you could get it in Oregon, you know, because all boutique stuff, right, in Oregon, boutique, high-end coffee, high-end microbrews. They were 10, 15 years ahead of everybody else with that stuff. But I'd get all jacked up on caffeine, all whacked out, and then I'd sit there nervously, just kind of in between takes and listening back, eating Corey's coffee candy. And I didn't know that it was bothering him. And he kept getting more and more standoffish and more. I'm like, dude, what's up? He goes like, dude, you're eating all my fucking candy, okay? I was like, I'm sorry.
No.
You want me to buy this? He's like, you can have some, but don't eat it all. I'm like, all right, dude, I'm sorry. Anyways, that's one of those. I remember that distinctly about that recording session, and I remember he wouldn't let it go either. Because in the future, I was like, oh, I'm gonna come over and record. He goes, yeah, just don't eat up all my candy. At that point in time, he was joking, but. Yeah, but there was a pre-Rex Black album, Jacob's Angel album that we recorded, and that. Can I talk about that or not?
Yeah, I didn't even know that.
Cool
I didn't even know that existed.
Well, the other thing that happened with that is that was the first time that anybody in our circle had recorded with Dale Bradley.
Oh,
we brought Dale in.
Sure, okay.
We brought Dale in to record cello parts, and what I had him do, you know, and as I hear what he did. With his own devices on 7 Second Circle album, I regret kind of directing him, but I had him follow the parts that I was doing. I remember one of the songs There was it was a mandolin part, and I just had him just copy me. And then one of the songs was a classical guitar. I was playing like a classical guitar, and I had him follow me, and they were good pieces. Don't get me wrong. I don't necessarily regret what I had him do, but hearing what he was capable of later on, it's like, man, I probably should just let him do what he wanted to do. But they turned out great. They really turned out great. They added this kind of eerie, dark feel to things, and at that time it was perfect. That's the one thing about music at that time that was coming out of the Northwest. They had this kind of dark, melancholic thing because of the weather system. It's unmistakable that there's certain music came out of the Northwest. It just kind of, it was perfect. It was right on kind of cue. It was right on time, if you will.
So Dale did play live with you, though, at least a couple times. I remember seeing you at like pizza joints or something like that. I mean, I'm pretty sure because look, so not knowing Dale, and all of a sudden you show up and Gandalf is there, like that dude was still like. I even did a photo shoot for Memory of Green, and I'm like, wow, you look the same as you did in 1995.
It's weird,
yeah.
And he probably looks exactly the same as he did in 1975 too.
That's true, yeah.
Maybe just younger, obviously, but probably the same dude, Just don't say Highlander to him or anything that. You might get your head cut off,
Well, it's funny. I mean, one of the things that I really miss about playing music with you has very little to do with music and has to do with all the other stuff that we would do.
You mean the criminal stuff?
You talk about the criminal. I wasn't going to go there, but the criminal stuff is good.
Yeah.
We could start there.
Right.
I was going to start off with Izzy's buffet, and then slowly work my way into Powell's bookstore, because we would sit there for hours with Eben Pagan and like look at marketing books and look at what was that guy that we were super into, that Subliminal Seduction, Brian Wilson Key. Remember all that?
Oh yeah. I think I still have some of his books.
And that's before conspiracy theories were a thing. Well, maybe now would be a good time to talk about the criminal stuff.
Albertsons and Safeway Corporation has been after me for the last 20 years for the vandalism I did to the carts that were left in their parking lots at late at night. Is that what you're talking about?
It is. And then Home Depot.
I don't think that actually was a felony. I think it was maybe a class 1 misdemeanor.
Definitely not a felony for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, good. That's good.
Stay in school, kids.
And Home Depot? What were you talking about?
Home Depot. Well, when Home Depot opened up, we went through many iterations of carpet down in the juke room. And that was the same.
Right.
That was the same place where they would close at like 8 o'clock at night. And what would happen is, Rich and I he had an S10 pickup truck that he didn't really care about. He cared for it, but he didn't care about how it looked. I mean, it had like a black quarter panel on it, and like these really like
and a black hood
and a black hood,
black quarter panel.
Yep.
Because there was an accident. I forget if I got in an accident. I inherited that car from my family, and it was like that was just black primer. I didn't have the money to get the thing painted. I'm like, what kind of fool would spend money on getting it painted? You know what I mean?
When you could buy it in Telefax.
Another Mesa Boogie. Yeah, I'm going to buy another Mesa Boogie amp. What kind of fool would spend money on painting your car? That's for suckers. I need to buy this original, Ibanez TS-808, distortion pedal from the early 80s, for $400. That's what I need.
Yeah.
Should have sold that pedal, by the way. That's a different story. I had an original one of those pedals, but anyways. But yeah.
I remember that.
You're for suckers.
You were pretty proud of that. Yes, painting your car is definitely for suckers. So anyway, he's got this truck, and Home Depot would close, and there would be left over in the parking lot would be this fodder of these shopping carts, and he would get up really close, and he's like, dude, grab the end of that cart. And I'm like, okay. And I would grab the end of the cart, and he would start to take off and get up to about 30 miles an hour, and I would just let the cart go, and we would just watch it ram into other carts. It was kind of like a medieval days in the parking lot of Home Depot after they would close.
I don't think we did any real damage to anything except for the carts, number one. And number two, I'm certain that the statute of limitations is worn out for those types of crimes. So you can talk about it all you want.
24
that
years,
was a lot of fun.
probably.
It was we would cackle like little demons. We'd be like, yeah! Like it was so, we were all cracked out on Diet Coke and fucking pizza, or Coke and pizza, just all cracked out on junk food and chips and shit, and then go down there and do that. Like, fucking
easily
juvenile
amused.
delinquents.
Easily amused. Well, yeah, Rex was the only one of us that was married during that time, so he had to go home, and left to our own devices, we got into trouble all around Eugene. So speaking of that, really
True.
quick, let's roll back for a sec. How did you end up in Eugene in the first place?
Oh man.
I mean, you didn't really
well,
grow up there, did you?
No, I didn't. Long story short, my stepfather, when I was 12 years old, first off, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania in the Rust Belt. Like if you drew a diagonal line between Cleveland and Pittsburgh, I was kind of right in the middle there.
Okay.
And there was no money there. There was no jobs. I mean, when those steel mills shut down in kind of the late 60s, early 70s, people just kind of hung out. There was no industry, no jobs. And so my stepfather had the good sense to, like, we need to get the fuck out of Western Pennsylvania. And his sister was living in Roseburg. And the original plan was he went out to Roseburg and he ended up going out to Alaska. And he was going to be getting a job as chief engineer at a hotel someplace in Alaska. I forget where it was. So we were going to actually move to Alaska, not to Oregon. And we got to Roseburg to kind of get situated because we were going to get to Roseburg first, get all situated, and then he would go up to Alaska, and then once he was all settled, we'd go up there. Well, when we got to Roseburg, the job had been taken, and it was like, we're not, we burned the boats, we burned the bridges, we're not going back to PA.
Oh, bummer.
And so we ended up living in his sister's little, 1,500 square foot, it's not that little, but little bungalow house in Roseburg, and four of us lived in one room for like 6 months. And he was able to get a job, and with a company that was a tech company. He ended up, they hired him and taught him how to do CNC machining. So that was like, okay, great, we're here. And then I'll spare you the whole details, but eventually they ended up going to Eugene. I had moved back with my father because I got along better with my real dad than I did with my stepdad. And then I kind of was over Western PA, loved my dad, but it was like PA really does suck. And then I went back out to Oregon. And at that point in time, they had moved to Eugene, which was night and day different, obviously, than Roseburg. And then I lived there for a few years before I went to Portland. But that's how I ended up in Eugene. And I went to Churchill for 11th grade. And I met some cats there. I met Dee Harrington, which is a whole other tangent we don't necessarily need to go down. But
you met Dee Harrington in high school? Like, did he go to high school?
No, Dee was like 10 years older than us. But what happened was
that's what I thought.
There was another kid who, if I remember correctly, I forget the kid's name, but he was a dickweed. And that's all you need to know. He was a dickweed, but he was a decent guitar player, but he thought that he was like the best guitar player in the world. And somehow he introduced me to, like, literally Dee just lived a few blocks away from me. And this kid lived a few blocks away from him. And he somehow introduced me to Dee. And I was like, this guy, it's not possible human beings are able to play guitar this way. Yeah, I met Dee when I was going to Churchill. And it totally changed my whole thinking about guitar and the whole kind of path of the shredder, But yeah, that's how I ended up in Eugene.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's a trip. Yeah, I remember the first time I saw Dee Harrington play. I was pretty impressed.
It was unbelievable.
Really
to this day. I mean, when you're a kid, you don't know much. You're like, you think But to this day, I'm like, dude, he's definitely one of the best guitar players I've ever seen. I mean, he would do things that, like, you'd hear things on albums. You're like, I don't know how human beings can do those things. And like literally 3 or 4 days later, you'd go to Dee's place and he had figured out those things. And across the board, like everything from like Yngwie Malmsteen and Paul Gilbert, that kind of stuff. But then he'd like, here's the Helicasters, which were, you get the album from these session guitar players, Nashville session guitar players that were country guys, and they'd be doing all this crazy stuff, this, finger picking stuff and these bends and this weird stuff that was completely like a completely different universe than anything, shredder wise, rock and roll. And you go to his place and he'd figure out all that. I'm like, it was almost like surreal. Anyways, yeah, Dee was an amazing guitar player. Learned a lot from him.
So how'd you meet Eben Pagan?
You don't know this? This is a great story. So when I would go to Dee's place, occasionally this guy Mike Pagan would be there. And Mike Pagan was this old hippie from New York. And Mike was he was this eccentric guy. We'd laugh and joke, and he would say things that were just crazy, sometimes. Because Dee was a Christian, which was funny because he'd drink beer and he'd curse, but he was a Christian. But Mike was kind of a, pagan, not a pagan. He was kind of an agnostic, atheist kind of guy. And Mike would say, "Hey, Rich, all those people that was praying to Jesus is praying to the Antichrist." I'm like, what? What are you talking about? What? Because I kind of had somewhat kind of turned from Christianity, but I also was still afraid of going to hell at that time. So I was like, you shouldn't say that stuff. Oh yeah, yeah. In the Bible it says, God said, you shall not have any other gods before me. And then Jesus comes down and said he's God. So Jesus is the Antichrist. And he'd kind of spin you at these things that you couldn't get out of. It's like, okay, if that's what the Bible says, and then Jesus comes down and says this, then he's got to be the Antichrist. And I'd be like, but he would say to me over and over again, hey, you got to meet my son Eb. You'd like him. And we just never crossed paths. Eben would be there at different times. And then one day I came in and Eben was recording a song because him and Dee were in a project together and he was focused. And after you get to know Eben, when he's focused, he doesn't want to be interrupted. So Dee's like, oh, this is Eb. And Eben just kind of was like dismissive. Hey, how's it going, man? And just kind of real standoffish. I'm like, that guy's kind of a dick. And so I didn't really care for him because I thought he should have stopped doing what he was doing to kind of acknowledge my great presence. You know what I mean?
Of course.
And then so we didn't really hit it off at first. And then I don't know, a couple months later, I saw him someplace and gave him another chance. I was like, hey, what's up? And then I made some comment and he laughed. I'm like, oh, this guy's smart. He's got a good sense of humor, And then for whatever reason, we just quickly became very close friends. I think it was a combination of being interested in similar things. This weird kind of intuitive sense of humor where there was quirky kind of dark things that he kind of appreciated. And then, not to go down the tangent, but he got involved with the personal development world. And early on, I remember us having a conversation about something and I'm like, oh, this thing made me feel bad. And he's like, no, it didn't. You're responsible for the way you feel. And they ended up giving me a book about personal development stuff, which changed the course of my life, obviously, for personally and professionally.
So that's a trip. I didn't know that Dee Harrington was the hub of all that. I'm curious, and I'll just go down one more time to see if I can make the connection here. How did Corey know Dee Harrington? From the same kids at school, because Corey went to Churchill as well.
I think. Well, there's another guy, really, really good guitar player, John Ortiz, and it's funny because I don't think that I met Dee through John. I think I met them through this other kid. It's possible I met him. No, I think I met him through this other kid. But Dee knew John too, and John was also like a child prodigy, like 17-year-old. Dee was like 10 years older than us, so Dee was 27. So it made sense, that Dee was able to do a certain amount of things. Although he was one of the only guys in town. In the state who could do those things, actually. But John Ortiz was this kid, this 17-year-old kid who came up from San Jose, who was a total like savant player. Spent a summer learning, Paganini's 24 Caprices for violin on the guitar. And Corey was friends with John, and John also met Dee. I don't know how they all, but I think Corey met Dee through John. And I became friends with John, and I became friends with John, and in a really, really sad state of affairs, John, towards the end of our junior year, John kind of, what would you call it? Kind of his mental illness bloomed, and he came out basically over the course of a couple months. He started acting real erratic, and he was diagnosed as bipolar, and he had some other thing too, and he ended up like leaving. They ended up going back to San Jose. He was in some sort of mental institution for 30 days because he was all whacked out. And I didn't hear from John for years. I'm friends with him on Facebook now, but that's how Corey met Dee.
Okay. Once I quit Hack and we started playing in Henry's Child, I kind of didn't want to quit all my other projects, and Andy and Rich were kind of like, dude, you're not going to have time for it. And I was like, yeah, well, where there's a will, there's a way. I'll make it happen, kind of a thing. And then it turns out I didn't have time for it because they practiced every dang day and played 3 times over the weekend. So it was a pretty crazy ride. And you very early on were a hub for like Andy really wanted to have keyboards in the band, and he was totally like trying to get you to come play keys and stuff like that. I mean, what was the whole saga with that?
Right. I played drums pretty well. I played guitar pretty well. I was an okay bass player. I think that Andy just kind of wanted my energy and my creative force in the band. And Rich was you didn't really necessarily need another guitar player because, Rich was, I don't really think that Rich is playing as like Alex Lifeson's, but he does the kind of playing where like Alex Lifeson was able to carry a band where you didn't necessarily need a second
Sure,
guitar player, where
sure.
some bands need a second guitar player. So it was like it didn't make sense to necessarily bring me in as a second guitar player. And I think maybe Rich might have been afraid that, well, this guy's a fucking shredder. What's he going to do? We're not putting solos in my songs, which I'd feel the same way. And so there might have been a couple songs where it might have made sense to have a second guitar part to layer things. But for the most part, just the second guitar wasn't needed. And I think, they assumed that I would be able to pick up keyboards. I think I played a little bit, but not much. To this day, I'm not really a keyboard player. But I think that Andy assumed that having me involved creatively would take the band to the next level. And I considered it. I really considered it. And really, I think the reason I didn't join, because it was really it was a real I toiled over that a lot, because I felt like you guys were on a path, and all I wanted to do at that point in time in my life was be a rock star. I'm like, I got to be a rock star. I don't care. Fuck
Right.
school. Fuck everybody else. I don't care about education. And so I felt like you guys were on the path, and so it was really difficult for me to say no to that. But I think that there was two reasons I said no. One was I had a certain kind of relationship with Rex, and we were doing certain things that I knew that Rex would be devastated, about that. And I felt like I had a decent shot with Rex, even though we kind of went a different direction from rock and roll. We went into this acoustic thing. I did feel like there was still a decent shot with Rex. But even more than that, if my memory's correct, and I think it is, I'd already started to think about the idea of moving to Portland. I don't know how long it was after that I moved to Portland, maybe 6 months or a year, but I know that the thought process about moving to Portland had already kind of showed up. And I knew that, okay, leaving a band that, to move to Portland is one thing, but to join another band when you're thinking about moving to a different city is not, that's a foolish thing, and it's not cool. And so it just, but I remember really kind of toiling over that and doing a lot of soul searching to try to figure out what the right thing to do was. I also feel like I had some sort of intuitive sense about what Andy's vision was, and I agreed with him that me being involved with the band would take it a certain direction that might have, that might have upped the game at that point in time.
Sure.
So it was so kind of was very honored, but at the same time, it just didn't feel right,
Yeah,
feel
of
right.
course.
And then I moved to Portland. I did end up moving to Portland 6 or 8 months or 9 months later.
That's right.
And then I ended up joining another band up there.
What band did you join in Portland?
Joined the American Girls.
Oh, that's right.
And the interesting thing, I'll tell you a short story about that was, if you remember, we did a going away party for me behind I think it was
Irik's
house,
where Henry's Child played.
Henry Child played, and Hack played, and the Betmars played, and the American Girls played. And the interesting thing about that was, I was playing drums, right, for Hack, and the American Girls came down. They had just fired their drummer, and they're like, "Dude, we'll play, but we don't have a drummer." And I had heard of enough of their songs that I'm like, I can probably sit in to at least a couple of these songs. So I just kind of comped it. I just kind of was like, a couple of the songs, I knew the structure, and so I ended up playing with them. And when I got to Portland, I got a call. I forget who called me, but they were like, "Hey man, do you want to play with us?" And I was like, and then they let me hear their new album that they had just recorded, and I was blown away by it. And it was like swanky Britpop. It was like Cake and Oasis and that kind of a thing, the
Right,
Wonder stuff,
right.
which was not really my vibe, but it was popular, and I really felt these guys had certain songwriting sensibilities, and I thought these guys are going to get signed, and they did. They did end up getting signed for a short period of time with Sony, but I ended up playing with them when I first got to Portland for like 18 months.
That was John Bolt's big claim to fame, because 2 years after us,
Yeah.
they won the Sonic Explosion, and they were the first band that he sort of air quotes sold from one label to another.
Oh, really? I don't know anything about that. I don't know anything about that, man. Because I was already in Southern California at that point in time. So.
Right. Yeah, and every year that Henry's Child would come down to NAMM, we would stay with Rich Miller in Carlsbad, California. But anyway, to for the uninitiated who might be 20 years younger than us, back in the 90s, the whole thing was to be signed to a label. If you were signed to a label, they would advance you a bunch of money, and you could live like people thought that rock stars should live. And
Right, you
even
get yourself a
at that,
Ferrari Testarossa and cocaine and some strippers. That was really what was all about for me, you know?
For 1 week. You could afford that.
Exactly.
But anyway, so inside of that, there was the hierarchy, right? So there was small labels, and then they would sell to bigger labels, and of course they were using the model of Sub Pop up in Seattle, where
Right.
they had kind of air quotes sold Nirvana to Geffen Records, and then it became a thing. Because I always kind of had my finger on the business end of things like that. And so I did not know that you played in American Girls. I mean, I remember you telling me kind of about it, but I totally spaced that off. Did you play on any records?
No, I did not. So what ended up happening is that the demo, I heard the demo for, which album was it? It's the second album that they did, and I forget the name of the album off the top of my head, but I can see the album cover. But they had to go back in and do a couple backing tracks. And so there was one song that all of us got together and did a clap track. It was like, and that's my contribution, recording wise to the American Girls. But no, everything had been recorded. I just learned the songs, and then the only reason why I left them was they were moving back to Eugene. And at the time, I wasn't driving because I got in a dumbass uninsured accident, and they pulled my license for a year. I still had a car, but I wasn't driving, and I was like, energetically, I didn't want to go back to Eugene. I was like, man, this is not to mention the fact that I didn't have any way to get back and forth, and I just was like, man, I can't do this, guys. I because they were all moving back to Eugene because they had to finish their degrees. I think some of the guys, their families were paying for things, and they were like, hey, if you want us to pay for your school, you got to finish it. Otherwise, we're pulling everything.
Oh,
and so,
right.
And so it made sense for them to go back to Eugene, but I just couldn't. And then they went back to Eugene, and I was devastated. And right around that time, Eben's like, hey, man, you ready to cut your hair and get a real job? You ready to let go of the rock star dream and get a fucking life as an adult? And I said yes. And then I moved to Southern California. But yeah, that was why I knew they were going to get signed. I expected a different outcome. They were with Sony for like 6 months, and they got dropped because, music, every few years, the whole vibe and the whole scene changes, and they just unfortunately got signed at the wrong time, There was a lot of butt rock bands that were really, really, really great that came out in 1989 that no one ever knows about because, that was right when Pearl Jam and all that stuff came out, and people were on to the next thing. And unfortunately, American Girls, that was the kind of their thing. They got signed so late in the game that people were on to the next thing. But they were great musicians, really great musicians and good guys.
Yeah, they were good. They were good dudes for sure, and I liked the Betmars as well, and John and those guys.
That's how I met those guys. Yeah.
I don't know how I ended up doing it, but I ended up playing bass for them at the Wow Hall for a show opening for Henry's Child.
I forget. I kind of remember that.
I got a "Let You Know" song or whatever.
And it's funny because I loved those guys. There was John, there was Ty, and there was Adam, and they kind of thought that I was a dork, I think, a little bit. I mean, they didn't think I was totally a dork because they thought I was funny and I was cool, but they thought musically I was a dork because they're like, you're into all this butt rock shit and it's stupid. And
didn't you live with them, or did they?
And shredding stupid. Yeah, I lived with them. I lived with them. Yeah, I lived with John and Ty, and then Ty moved out, I think, and then Ty moved in with his girlfriend, and then Adam moved in. And then, a lot of different iterations of that. But yeah, I lived with them, and they were great roommates. They were cool. John was a trip too. Yeah.
Yeah. He was.
Well, John was a trip because John was a trip because his father was like a real professional, like business guy. He worked for some company like HP or something, and he was like an executive. So John had that, that structured professional executive upbringing. He had that kind of white collar feel about him, but yet he loved this kind of ghetto gutter rock and roll kind of thing too. And he was an anomaly. There were times where it's like, yeah, let's just get fucked up. And there was times like, Richard, that's unacceptable. And he was Richard, that's unacceptable. Nope, we pay our bills on time here, and you need to get. It was an interesting anomaly with that, But
right.
It was an interesting time to be a musician in Eugene at that time.
Yeah. No, it really was. So okay, so we've gone from Eugene up to Portland. You decided not to move back with the American Girls down to Eugene, and instead you moved to Southern California. Is that kind of the last of your music kind of career or desires? Did you have any bands?
I came up a couple times and recorded with my buddy Derek Plaza. And the first time we recorded back at the Juke Room with Corey, because Corey had taken over, and I came in, and I had learned the songs on site. He would show me the songs. We'd go through them a couple times, and then I'd record it. And I played drums. On the first album, I played drums, and I played lead guitar. I don't think I played any bass on the first album. And then like a year later, I think it was, or 2 years later, he recorded again, second album, and he recorded it at a proper studio. No offense to Corey's studio, but Corey's studio wasn't really, it was a converted garage. It wasn't a real, but we recorded it at a place that had a proper studio, and there was some vintage amps. There was like, 60s Fender amps, and there was other cool things that I got to play through. And on that album, I played drums and guitar and bass. And I think actually on both those albums, I think I borrowed Ty from the Betmars drum set to record on those, which is interesting. Yeah. I'm just remembering that. But yeah, after that, man, nothing really significant. I continue to play. I've got a big jam room in the back of my office, which you've seen, and I play pretty much every day. But I haven't done, anything with a band in years and years.
And the reality is, it's just the tyranny of time and distance, because you're easily welcome anytime to join any of our bands that we have going on. And we have some a little bit better than the Juke Room, because ours has a bathroom up there. And you did a couple songs with Jarrett, right?
I did. Yeah, no, yeah, I did. Yeah, I did one song with Jarrett that was mostly completed. And it's just interesting because I think about the stuff that I record, and it's all over the map. Jarrett, actually, I've got a little Pro Tools set up. Now I moved over to Logic, but a little Pro Tools set up. The Jarrett's recorded some demos when he's come down and hung out. But they're all over the map. Like, I got some smooth jazz stuff. I got some butt rock stuff. It's now last time I recorded was some acoustic stuff, kind of very Jar of Flies. I'm kind of all over the map. I kind of probably need a writing partner to kind of keep me on track. It's a little ADD, but it's fun. It's definitely, I do plan, of course, the entrepreneurial conversation is always, one day when I have a little more time and a little bit more freedom, I'm going to get to this. But I do really hope and believe that will be the case. So. And
it will be. Absolutely, man. Sweet, man. Well, I'm going to play Eastern Thinking from earlier in the podcast.
Okay.
And, yeah, thanks for taking the time and having a conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me, brother.
And like we talked about in the podcast, here's the reverb-drenched drums, low 5-string bass from Tommy T, and those wonderful, wonderful vocals from Rex on a song by Hack called Eastern Thinking.
Fester. Fever. I'm helpless. Trails unknowing, absent gestures releasing me from its path. Eastern thinking finds me sitting, staring at the map.
thinking finds me sitting, staring at the man. And if she's sinking, even breathing, I'll find a reason to find it in her head. And if she's sinking, even being, and I'll find a reason to find it in her head.
Eastern thinking. Man, I remember Hack thinking they were so weird at the time when we'd go play John Henry's or Good Times or one of those kind of places down in Eugene. Anyway, this is the end of the episode. Thank you so much for joining me this far. I appreciate you, and I appreciate your participation in the Am I Crazy or Am I Just Raving podcast. If you are not a subscriber, I would request of you to go to your respective stores, either Google Play, Spotify, or Apple iTunes Music, and please hit the subscribe button. That way you can get all the latest episodes delivered directly to your mobile device. If you are not already on the newsletter list, please go to henryschild.com and click the download link on top, and that will take you down to a section where you can leave your first name and your email address, and that will also get you some free goodies that are very, very cool and allow for more open communication with us in the future. Now, if I've changed the website, the newsletter sign-up link is going to be on the very, very first top page. So as you can imagine, this is going to be a radical change, and it's going to be very cool. I'm super excited to share this with you because podcasting is outside of my wheelhouse, but websites are inside my wheelhouse. So again, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you, and we will see you at a show sometime soon. Thanks for listening. Talk to you later.
It came out my mouth.